Today's lesson is birds of a feather. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our program. I'm Roger.
And I'm Helen.
And today we're going to be talking about a particular kind of dinosaur, T-Rex or Tyrannosaurus Rex. And we're wondering and we're asking the question, are dinosaurs related to birds? And more specifically, is T-Rex related to a chicken? What an interesting question.
That's right, because, well, the Tyrannosaurus Rex is now extinct. And when we think about it, we think of this very large creature, reptile-like. And the fact that they may be related to the ordinary chicken, which has feathers, which is a bird, and it's quite small, it's very surprising.
That's right, and it's kind of interesting to imagine a large chicken knocking over a jeep and then eating a lawyer, as what happened with the T-Rex in the movie Jurassic Park. So imagine that being pecked to death by a chicken. That's not something I'd like to happen to me, but in any case here, we're not going to worry about that too much because I don't think chickens are as big as T-Rex was, and so therefore we have nothing to worry about. But the question still remains, are chickens and the Tyrannosaurus Rex related in some way? So let's try to answer that question. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson now one time.
Birds of a feather. What does the long-extinct Tyrannosaurus Rex have in common with the ordinary chicken? As it turns out, the answer is more than you might think. According to a relatively recent discovery, the two species are in fact distant relatives.
Before we begin with the article, let's look at the title of today's article, Birds of a Feather. So this phrase is actually part of a longer expression, which is birds of a feather flock together. And it's used for saying that people who are similar to one another tend to support and agree with one another. They tend to gather because they share similar ideas or preferences or hobbies. So it's usually applied to people, but here we're talking about two different types of animals that actually share some similarities.
That's right, they have some things in common. So here in the first paragraph it says, what does the long-extinct Tyrannosaurus Rex have in common with the ordinary chicken? So yes, that's the question. What does A have in common with B? How are they similar? A lot of times people in Western countries get Taiwan and Thailand mixed up. So maybe you might ask the question, what do Taiwan and Thailand have in common? Well, they're both countries in Asia. They both start with the letter T, but other than that, they don't have a lot in common. But in this particular case, we're asking the question, what does Tyrannosaurus Rex have in common with a chicken? How are they similar? What things do they have that are the same?
Right. Well, first of all, they don't seem to have much in common. First of all, the T-Rex is long extinct, which means that it has been extinct for a long time. It has not existed for a long time. And the chicken is an ordinary chicken that exists today, and it's really all over the place. We eat it, we see it. It's definitely not going to go extinct anytime soon. But as it turns out, the answer is more than you think. So the question was, what do these two species of animals have in common? As it turns out, the answer is they actually have a lot more in common than you think. And here the phrase, as it turns out, is used for saying what the situation actually is when something different could have happened. For instance, I could say, I was supposed to work overtime, but as it turns out, we got the afternoon off. So as it turns out, even though these two animals seem very different from each other, they actually have more in common than a person might think.
Indeed, and sometimes you don't have to say the word as. You could just say, well, it turns out that this is the case. So yes, indeed, this is something that is surprising here. The answer is more than you might think. They have more in common than you might think. They are similar in some ways. Now, according to a relatively recent discovery, the two species are, in fact, distant relatives. So we've had some recent research here. We've had a recent discovery. Some scientists have done some research and they made this discovery and they found out that these two species have something in common. Now, here we've got the word species, and that just refers to two types of animal that are the same. They can reproduce with each other. They can have children with each other. And again, the species we're talking about is T-Rex or Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then the chicken. And so these are different species of animal, and they are distant relatives. They're not close relatives. They're distant relatives. Maybe you know someone here who's a distant relative of Kongzi or Confucius or whatever.
Yes, or you might discover a distant relative living in a different country. Sometimes people like to do research into their family tree, and they discover people living far away who are actually related to them. They might be third or fourth cousins, or there's some kind of relationship between the two people.
Okay, so yes, let's find out what they have in common as our lesson continues. Let's move on to the second part. We will listen first.
Scientists have long suspected that birds are related to dinosaurs because of similarities in their skeletons. But this latest research provides the first piece of molecular evidence to support the theory. The knowledge came about by chance when a team of paleontologists were forced to break a 68-million-year-old T-Rex leg bone in half for transportation. To their surprise, the bone had not fossilized all the way through, and they were able to remove a few tiny bits of protein for further study.
大家好，第二部分我们看到名词 skeleton， 指骨骼、骨架或是骸骨。举例来说 ，Underneath Paris are hundreds of miles of tunnels which hold the skeletons and remains of more than 6 million people. 巴黎地底有长达数英里的隧道，埋葬600多万人的骨骸和遗迹。也可以说 ，After old Mrs. Wimple died, they discovered her husband's skeleton sitting on the living room sofa, dressed in a tuxedo. Wimple 老太太过世后，他们发现她丈夫的骨骸穿着燕尾服坐在客厅沙发上。另外补充一个相关片语 ，skeleton in the 或是 skeleton in one's closet。表示不可外扬的家丑或是不可告人的秘密。我们可以说 My uncle has alcoholism and it's a skeleton in the closet. 我叔叔酗酒，且这是不可外扬的家丑。或者 Winnie has skeletons in her closet and everyone is curious about them. Winnie 有不可告人的秘密，而大家都对此感到非常好奇。接着我们看到单字 molecular。这个字是形容词，指分子的或是由分子组成的，像是 These chemicals affect cells on the molecular level. 这种化学物质对细胞的影响程度基于分子。也可以说 This drug alters muscle tissue on a molecular level. 这种药会对肌肉产生分子层面的改变。再来我们看到单字 fossilize。这个字是动词，指变成化石或是石化，像是 The animals that died a long time ago have already fossilized. 很久以前死的动物已经变成化石了。也可以说 Not only animals, but plants can also fossilize. 不只有动物会变成化石，植物也会。另外补充这个字的名词 fossil, F-O-S-S-I-L, fossil, 指化石。例如 At the Science Museum, Karen saw fossils that were millions of years old. Karen 在科学博物馆看见有几百万年历史的化石。或是 Fanny found a fossil of an ancient fish on her father's farm. Fanny 在她父亲的农场里找到一具古老鱼类的化石。
So scientists have long suspected that birds are related to dinosaurs because of similarities in their skeletons. So before this discovery of the relationship between T-Rex and ordinary chickens, scientists have already thought that perhaps birds and dinosaurs are related because of a similarity that they have, which is their skeletons. The skeleton is the set of bones that supports an animal's body. So they discovered that birds and dinosaurs have similar skeletons, similar sets of bones that support them.
Yep, all the bones together is a skeleton. Remember, the bone for your head is the skull, along with the jawbone. And then, of course, all those bones put together is a skeleton. So, yes, scientists have known this for a long time, or at least they have thought this, because these dinosaurs and chickens, or rather birds, have similarities in their skeletons. Their skeletons are similar. The bones are kind of similar in a similar shape. They're related. They look kind of like each other. But this latest research provides the first piece of molecular evidence to support the theory. So before that, they just kind of thought, a bird's skeleton looks an awful lot like a dinosaur's skeleton, so maybe they're related, but they don't actually have any solid proof. Maybe they didn't have any DNA proof or anything like that, or some skin samples or whatever. So we're talking here about molecular evidence, and molecular has to do with molecules, like the water molecule is H2O, one hydrogen atom combined with two oxygen atoms. That's a molecule. And so, of course, they've been able to, I guess, kind of prove this, or they have some evidence here based on molecules. And that, of course, is part of some latest research. It's when you look into something, you look for information to try to make a discovery. The knowledge came about by chance when a team of paleontologists were forced to break a 68-million-year-old T-Rex leg bone in half for transportation. So first of all, the knowledge came about by chance. First of all, came about is the past tense of the verb phrase to come about, which means to happen. So in this case, the knowledge happened, or the knowledge was acquired. They got the knowledge by chance. And of course, by chance means kind of by accident. They weren't really looking for it. It just happened.
Right, so how did it happen? Accidentally or by chance? Well, a team of paleontologists, these are scientists who study ancient life, so they were forced to break a 68-million-year-old T-Rex leg bone in half for transportation. So evidently, this piece of leg bone was too large to be carried from one place to another, so they had to break it in half for the purpose of transportation. Transportation is just the activity of moving from one place to another, or moving something from one place to another. So before we had trucks, railroads were used for the transportation of goods. These days, goods can be transported via drones and airplanes and ships and boats and stuff. So in this case, the leg bone was so big that in order to transport it, or for the sake of transportation, they had to break it in half.
Right. Transportation, of course, as Helen said, moving from place to place, either people or things. So, of course, I've recently considered buying a house in Taichung. I'm going to move to Taichung. I've heard it's a great city. But when I buy a new house, I need to consider transportation, okay? Is the house I'm going to buy near the MRT there? Are there bus lines there? Can I park a car there somewhere? Can I take a U-bike or whatever? So, of course, all these things do have to do with transportation. So, yes, they had to break that bone in half. It was just too big to transport in a relatively small pickup truck or something like that. So they broke that bone in half, and to their surprise, or they were surprised to see that the bone had not fossilized all the way through, and they were able to remove a few tiny bits of protein for further study. Now, of course, you know what a fossil is. That is something that came to us from millions of years ago. It's been in the ground for a long period of time, and it is hardened and turned into rock, or at least a rock-like substance. And that's a fossil, that's a noun, but the verb is to fossilize, which means something changes into a fossil. It fossilizes.
Right, so you have a lot of ancient sea animals like mollusks and clams and things like that fossilized when they are covered by rock and they are preserved in a way through time by these layers of rock.
Okay, so they had this bone that was fossilized, but not all the way through. It was only fossilized partly, and a few tiny bits of protein still existed inside of the bone. Maybe in the marrow there, they were able to find something that had not fossilized. It was some kind of protein, which is danbaizhi, I believe, in Chinese. So they could use that to further study the dinosaur. Maybe they could get a DNA sample or something like that. But that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's find out more in the third part.
Comparison of the protein structure to that of 21 modern-day animals revealed chickens and ostriches to be the closest living descendants, followed by alligators. Members of the team were especially excited about the possibilities that the study opens up for future research. Scientists hope to use protein analysis to build better family trees between extinct and living organisms.
第三部分我们看到单字 extinct， 这个字是形容词，指灭绝的或是绝种的。举例来说 Graham likes to spend his time reading about extinct civilizations. Graham 喜欢把时间花在阅读关于灭绝文明的事物。或者 The dodo is an extinct species of flightless bird. 渡渡鸟是一种已绝迹不会飞行的鸟。最后我们看到名词 organisms， 表示生物、有机体或是有指微生物。我们可以说 Many organisms are too small to be seen without a microscope. 许多生物体的体型太小，得用显微镜才看得到。也可以说 The water bear is an organism that can survive in the vacuum of outer space. 水熊虫是一种可以在外太空的真空环境中生存的生物体。
So after the scientists cut the leg bone of the T-Rex in half for transportation, they did some studies of the protein inside and they found that it was very interesting. It says here, comparison of the protein structure to that of 21 modern-day animals revealed chickens and ostriches to be the closest living descendants, followed by alligators.
Wow, so I guess ostriches, chickens, and alligators are distant relatives of this particular dinosaur. So a comparison of the protein structure to the protein structure of 21 modern-day animals revealed something else here. So remember, we're saying comparison of one thing to that, or to comparison of something else. So in this particular case, we're comparing the protein structure of that particular bone and the protein structure of 21 modern-day animals. So when they compared those things together, that all revealed or showed us that chickens and ostriches are the closest living descendants, followed by alligators. So here a descendant, of course, is somebody who is related to somebody further down the line many generations later. So chickens and ostriches are the closest descendants of that T-Rex, and then something that is farther away are alligators. So they're all distantly related to the T-Rex.
That's really interesting because I would have thought that alligators were closer to the T-Rex in terms of being a descendant of the T-Rex, just because they look similar.
Well, they're reptiles, right?
Yeah, they're reptiles, and yeah, they look similar. I would never have guessed that chickens were actually closer to the T-Rex than alligators. So this is a very surprising discovery, and members of the team were especially excited about the possibilities that the study opens up for future research. So the acquiring of knowledge doesn't stop here. They made some interesting discoveries, but now they're very excited about the possibility that more discoveries can be made based on what they have already discovered.
Right, so if they discovered that they are distantly related, but they might discover some other things, and who knows, someday Someday they may be able to open up a Jurassic Park. They may be able to clone dinosaurs like they did in that movie, who knows? And scientists hope to use protein analysis to build better family trees between extinct and living organisms. So, of course, you're going to do some analysis, which means you look closely at something, you make observations, and you write that information down. Analysis, that's the noun. The verb is to analyze. And they're going to analyze the protein, or they're going to use protein analysis to build better family trees. And a family tree is just a record of your family history. Maybe you've done that yourself. You know, you get down on a piece of paper and you draw all these different lines and things like, here's me, and then my parents, and then my parents' brothers and sisters, and then their parents, and their parents. And yes, you just build this family tree until you can trace your heritage back to ancient China or something like that.
Yep. So what the scientists hope to do is to use the protein analysis to build better family trees between extinct and living organisms. So they're trying to draw connections based on science between animals that existed in the past that no longer exist and ones that are still living. So extinct, it describes something that has died out and no longer exists. So dinosaurs are extinct because they no longer exist. And organism is basically a living thing, and it's usually used for very small living things like bacteria, fungi, or insects. So these scientists want to draw connections, or they want to build a better family tree between animals that don't exist anymore and animals that still exist.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文一开始问我们一个问题，灭绝已久的暴龙和一般的鸡有什么共同之处呢？好，文中它是用到 in common 来表达共同。那常见的用法你可以说 have something in common 有共同之处， have nothing in common没有共同之处，或者是 have a lot in common 就是表达有许多共同之处等等。后面还可以接 with somebody 或是 with something 来表达。举例来说， They have a lot in common with each other 他们彼此之间有许多共同之处。好，那么课文下一句写到说 As it turns out, the answer is more than you might think. 结果证明啊，答案是或许比你想的还要多哦。那么 turn out 是表达结果是怎么样，最后演变成怎么样，这是用来带出事情的发展或是最终结果，通常就暗示着这个结果跟你想象或预期的不同。好，那我们现在用 as it turns out 逗号主词加动词，这样的句型就可以说明说某事它的后续发展有令人意外的结果或是情况，就类似中文说的结果是怎么样，结果证明怎么样。举例来说， As it turns out, the missing puzzle piece was under my pillow. 结果啊，那片不见的拼图就在我的枕头下。好，那这边我们也来学习 turn out 的其他用法。第一种我们可以用这样的句型是 It turns out that 主词加动词，例如 It turns out that Ron was not the person who stole the money. 结果发现啊 Ron 并不是偷钱的那个人，可能原本大家都以为是他，结果发现竟然不是他。好，再来看到第二个用法是 turn out to be 加上名词或形容词，这个 to be 也可以省略。那这样的句型呢，它是表达最后成为怎么样，最后被发现具有某种身份啊、特性、能力等等。举例来说， The man claimed he was a priest, but he turned out to be a fraud. 那名男子声称他是个牧师，结果啊，他其实是个骗子。好，那我们再来看课文第二部分，他有提到说，有一支古生物学家团队被迫将一块有6800万年历史的暴龙腿骨折成2半来运送。那令他们惊讶的是，那块骨头并没有完全石化。好，文中它是用到 to their surprise 来表达令他们惊讶的是。 当我们用 to 加上所有格 once 再加上情绪名词，这是用来表达说让某人感到怎么样的事，令某人怎么样的事，可以用来修饰整个句子或者是主词。那特别注意其中的情绪名词是要用单数哦。那我们介绍几个常见的情绪名词有 disappointment 失望， joy 快乐， shock 震惊， surprise 惊讶， regret 遗憾等等。好，那么这个 to 的前面呢，你也可以加入副词 much 去强调它的程度。举例来说 much to her disappointment, she didn't get her dream job. 令她相当失望的是，她并没有得到她的梦想工作。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Species. This species of butterfly is becoming increasingly rare. Skeleton.Scientists determined that the skeleton was around 2,000 years old. Research. Brooke applied for financial aid so that she could continue her research. Transportation. We will pay for any damage that occurs during transportation. Analysis. The blood samples have been sent to the hospital for analysis. Extinct. You can see the bones of many extinct animals at the museum. Organism.Each organism plays an important role in its ecosystem.
Discussion Starter starts now!
And here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, what was the most interesting or surprising part of the article and why?
Well, I was surprised to learn that the scientists had to break the T-Rex leg bone in half for transportation, because I would have thought that the scientists would hesitate to break something that's so old and so valuable, but I guess they had no other choice.
I guess not, but I was surprised to learn that Tyrannosaurus rex is closely related to the chicken. I thought that dinosaurs were closely related to turkeys, although turkeys and chickens are very similar, so I suppose it's the same thing. Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoyed reading along with us. I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.